screen capture video, I just want to go over what we've discussed in class already. This is sort of a review. If you have missed the class, however, then this is something you need to spend time on thinking as you listen to what I do here, but also looking through the material I provided in the schematic folder, where I show you two examples of the schematic from actual journal articles, and that will be located in another folder in our class's Blackboard site. But we've been talking about these, and in your conferencing, I've asked you to come with, to this point, the second conference was on the hook and the topic and the review of literature. We'll have a third one on the thesis, voice, and schematic section. And if you think about it, really, all our conferencing then will be really on what I'm looking at as the intro to your paper or your work. And I'm looking at a work being able, we can divide a work into three parts, right? Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, very sort of basic, right? Intro or beginning, middle, body, and end. But there's some very specific stuff that goes on in the intro of a lot of academic papers. Now, I am working on a template here. It does smack like a formula. It has taste like it's just a formula. But what I've done is I've looked at a lot of academic articles and read them and worked in them and written. And I will say that these ideas are rising from the work, that sort of work. So if I'm going to give you a rule, if I'm going to give you a guideline, it's going to be because I see it in 8 out of 10 academic papers, or 80% or 90% of papers will do this, or something like that. So this is one reason. Again, I'll say it again. It's just a simple thing, but the old, you can't use the first person pronoun I and me and my in academic work. I don't know where that has come from, and I am stunned that people can actually consider that as a rule when you look at the published work in both popular and academic work, and the first person pronouns are running around all over the place. So I would never, in fact, I encourage you to use the first person, but I wouldn't come up with a rule that I don't actually see happening in publication. So I do see these elements in writing today. So I'm going to share them with you, and I'm going to ask you to work within this arrangement, or excuse me, to work with these elements. Now, if this is your first time into it, and the process hopefully is becoming a little demystified for you, but if you still feel like you need this level of guidance, I would say just go ahead and stay with these steps, the ones I'm going to show you now. Try to organize your paper along this pathway. However, if you know what I'm talking about, and you understand these as individual elements, and you realize, hey, look, these do need to come up here in the front of the paper, but I can work with the arrangement, or I can combine things. I can combine the review of lit with the thesis, or maybe I can skip the topic itself, because when I give the reader my thesis, they're going to know my topic right away. So let me just kickstart it with starting with the thesis or something. So I've read a good number of papers that start with a review of lit, or others that actually they literally start with something like my thesis in this work is, and it's the first sentence of the paper. So if you realize I can be creative here, I can move these around, then go for it. All right. I mean, when I look at your paper, I might not recognize the formula right away, but I'll read it from the first page onto the rest, and if I begin to sense it's working well, it has an organic fluidity to it. It reads well, it holds together well, it's getting the job done, I'm going to look at that as a good piece of work, even though it might not be in exactly this order. So there are two options for you. One, just go ahead and work with this order, or if you feel you're up to the challenge, mix it up a little bit, make it your own. Just realize that your paper at the end of the day does need to have some stuff at the beginning. And that is the following. All right, obviously you need to make the reader aware of your topic, but more than that, your specific approach, the scope of your topic, and hopefully it's a narrowed, focused aspect of something. It's not just some huge topic like, you know, I don't know, games, the use of games in education, but in fact it's very specific, maybe focusing on one, the mobile games, apps in the classroom, um, about history or something, and you have a focused, topic. Um, Now, because what I'm saying is the topic, I mean, obviously ought to be given away quite early. That should go without saying. So let's move on to the others. Um, some teachers prefer to have the thesis be revealed down below. That's not really the model. I don't see that as the model for academic work. It's given early on, many times, usually, and the reader, the author is careful to say, hey, look, here's my point in the paper. This is what I'm going to try to show, and then he'll go on to do it, or she'll go on to develop it in the rest of the paper. So the thesis is usually up front, articulated as such. You can call it your thesis, you can call it your main point, you can call it your result. You can couch it some way like, this paper will establish, the notion that, okay, well, there's your thesis. So now, what we are doing here, right, is we are focusing on contributive research. So I'm not asking you just to go and look at 7 sources on a topic and to sum them up and to put them together in a paper and to put quotes in there and then turn it in. What you're actually turning in is, if you do that, is just a glorified book report. I don't want that, because I would rather you just tell me what the sources are and I'll look at them on my own, because then I can trust myself to do that and not assume that you may have missed something important. So it's not about just providing information. You will need to use information, of course, but you've got to use it originally. You've got to see creative links that people have kind of missed in some way so that you can provide a contribution. Okay, so this is contributive research here. And given your position, the time of the class, your experience on this, the money you have available to you, which is nothing, the teamwork you have, which is nothing, you got to do this on your own. There are really only a few ways you can work this, right? So it's more of an observational paper where you observe something unique about a topic that no one else has actually articulated or seen, and you offer it as a suggestion or an explanation of something or an extension of something or a revision of an idea, or maybe there's a term that no one has defined and you're going to define it. But you really do need to think of how you're going to contribute, right? So you need to come up with your point, and then you need to see how it fits in a review of literature. So somewhere at the beginning, you need to let your reader know, hey, these are what other people are saying about this topic. These are sort of the connections they're making. This is the stuff they're explaining or trying to answer. And you just present that as an overview of some of the major voices that are writing or working in your topic. And when you were ready, then you say, well, here's my points, this is what I'm going to give to the conversation, and this is how it's unique to me. So any sort of statement that says, here's how I'm adding to the conversation, here's how I'm contributing, right? That's a voice statement, and I need to see that. I need to see that you are aware of how the point that you have found or thought of is actually sort of unique to you. No one else has really seen it that way, or if they've worked with that same idea, but with a certain set of subjects or in a certain geographic location or in a certain context, if you can extend that same idea and show, okay, well, I like that idea, I like what they did there, but I'm going to extend it and look at it in this different context and see what happens here. That's a voice statement too. So you're stressing how your big idea is in fact unique to you and how it adds to the conversation. All right. Now, the topic, the review of lit, the thesis, and the voice, those 4 are in many, many, many models that we've looked at in class. So I want to say you need to have those in your intro. The schematic sometimes is not there. It's not there in published work, but sometimes it is. I would say it's about 50-50. Now, a schematic is a paragraph or 2 or 3 where the author takes the time and says, this is how I'm going to organize the rest of the paper. My thesis is this, It's unique to me in this way. And in the following pages, I'm going to outline it this way. I'm going to develop this way. First, I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to do that. After this, I'll introduce this notion. Finally, I'll close by applying it to a case or something, a case study. Um, I present it here as steps, but this sort of language really isn't used. It's a little more, sophisticated and smooth how authors present this. And if you want to look at the schematics, the two that I chose for models, you can find that in another folder. But I want you to provide a verbal map of the rest of the paper, okay, in your introduction, a verbal map in your intro. And I do want you to talk about the various sections your paper is going to have and how they're going to be arranged and what their jobs are going to do, what their jobs are, and how they're going to support the thesis. So I really I need to see all 5 of these organized in your intro. And that is your intro. The 5 are your intro. Now, there is something here added, a hook. The hook is literally the first 3 or 4 sentences of your paper. What do you have up there that's going to grab your reader's attention? Because if your title entices them, then they're going to give you the first line or the first 2 lines. And if you got something there that promises interest and relevance, then you're going to get your reader, right, to continue on. And so this is basically, how are you going to actually open up your paper? Are you going to open it up with a shocking fact, an interesting statistic, a concrete example full of imagery and detail, and especially weighty if it's a real-life example? People love specificity and concreteness, and maybe that will get them hooked, just an example of what you're talking about or something like that. That's a hook. But that would be your intro. Now, my thoughts on this are the hardest thing to do is actually to develop a unique point. Okay. But once you got that, the next thing I would say is the hardest to write is the schematic. That's when you have to sit back and say, okay, here's my thesis, right? It's not obvious, it's complicated. Okay? So do remember the 100-person in a room test, okay, for the mark of a good thesis. Once you think you have your big point, pretend that you're saying it to 100 people in a room. These people are smart, these people are well-read, and they think about a lot of things. And if you say your thesis, right, and it's so obvious and it's so self-evident that the 100 people in the room, 95 of them raise their hands when you say, do you agree? Do you believe me? Do you understand? They raise their hands. Then you need to complicate your thesis. You need to make it a little more profound, a little more sophisticated. There is a legitimate complication and complexity that you need to build into it, okay? And basically you need to go deeper, right? You got to get your thesis to the point where you believe this answers something. This is the explanation for something, but it's a developed and complicated explanation. It's not just third grade play. It's a college level explanation for this. So when you give it to an audience, they're like, well, I'm not too sure. I need explanation. I need to hear your reasons before I see your point or your connection. All right. So when you give your thesis out like that and you realize people are going to ask for my reasons, they're going to ask for explanations, I think that's a pretty good, it's a decent test to see if your thesis is complicated enough. And then ask yourself, well, okay, if they ask for my reasons, what are they? What are the steps I would do to take someone who was interested, who got to be interested in it, and was willing to give me 20 minutes? What steps would I take them through so that at the end they could see the reasonable nature of my thesis? Now, I might not actually convince them, but they will at least walk away thinking that it's possible and even probable. So what were the steps that I would give them? What do I have to give them first? What sort of information do I have to give them next? What sort of terms might I have to define after that? What examples would help after that? And think in terms of steps. Think in terms of teaching somebody. If you had to teach somebody, where would you start? And then what? And then what? And that would be your schematic. And you would actually just write it out in maybe 4 or 5 sentences, right? Now, once you get that written and you understand exactly what you want to say and how you want to say it, the body part, which we tend to view as the main part, seems to write itself, right? Because then you just look back at the schematic and you see it as a verbal map and you say, well, I said I was first going to do this, so let me first do that, and you do it. And then you finish that and you move on to what you said you were going to do next in the schematic, and you do it. So the body is just the schematic fully developed with the data, the evidence, the logic, the reasoning, the testimony, the source work, that sort of thing. Because we tend to view this as the main part of the paper, we tend to think this is the hardest part to write, when I personally experience and think that these are the hardest. And this happens in the months that you spend reading for the writing. Okay. Now, at the end, you're going to have to figure out how to close it. Now, I'm not sure how much time we'll have to devote to this in the semester. I would just say this. You have developed a collection of journal articles already through our work in the class. And if you would just look at how those those authors and their work, you would find that there are 5 or 6 or 7, conventional ways to end an academic contributive research paper. And here are some. Maybe you need to remind your readers of the main point and main supporting points. This is a thread-worn, technique, but I'm not going to say it's something you can't do. That's just basically where you say, hey, this is what I sought to prove in the paper. Here were my main points. Here's my thesis. Adios. It's functional. And for people that like to skim these things, that's appreciated. That's one way to do it. Maybe for a more memorable ending, you can end with an anecdote or a personal experience. Now, let me just make a note about personal experience. If you're going to bring personal experience into the paper, it belongs in the intro as a hook, or it belongs in the close. Okay, notice I'm not saying conclusion. Conclusion is your thesis. The end of the paper is the end of the paper. Okay, so it belongs in the close. The reason for this, the personal experience, is that before you can use it as evidence, right, which is what you would need to view it as if you were to put it up here for support. This is your supporting area. You have to first prove to your reader that you are representative of a large group of people. Because what might be true for you may not be true for anyone else. I mean, philosophically, at a very basic level, that is a possibility. Now, it may be true for some others, or it may be true for a lot, but you just don't know until you've done a study showing that you are representative. Okay, so personal experience tends, because it's so concrete and it's often written with passion, it tends to make a really good close or a really good open. It doesn't work for evidence, unfortunately, until you can show that you are representative of a class. So I would put personal experience down here, which is unfortunate for some, because every now and then I run into a student who wants to base the whole paper on personal experience, but that just won't work. That might work for a memoir, but not for an academic contributed research paper. Common is also common as a closing technique is a call for future study. Sometimes the author will use this space down here to meet a silent objection that has been building throughout the paper, and you can sort of sense, but what about, and then finally the author is going to just diffuse it. Sometimes this is a good place to admit to limitations and to highlight the suggestive nature of the work. And I suggest this for you because of your position and the time you've had to write the paper. This does not reflect really what happens. You get, you don't write a quality paper in 10 weeks. It just doesn't really happen that way. So, you don't have a team to help you. You don't have money. You don't have all that sort of thing. So, or experience. So at this point, you might just want to say, hey, this has just been a suggestion. This is an idea. I need someone to continue the substantiation of my thesis, to provide more, more work on this. That's one way to do it, and that's honest and it's appreciated. So no harm in that, right? In fact, if you're not sensitive to that, you can do an opposite mistake. You can be so superficially confident that you're overreaching your claims all the time, and you're using absolutes or just overgeneralized statements, and that becomes very obvious after a couple pages in, and it undercuts your credibility. So if you really don't have the full handle on it, write it anyway, especially if it's a good idea. Just admit that it's still kind of loose and you need someone to come later to help you tighten it up and to check it out again. So now you can also suggest a novel application for your thesis. So you might have been thinking about something and writing about something as it applies to X, right? And the whole paper was about how this thing applies to X. But then you might at the end say, hey, but you know what? It can be applied to other areas too. What about Y? What about Z? And you can sort of showcase new applications. And because it's in the closing space, the reader does not expect a full case, it to be a full treatment of it. All right. So this is a great way to just highlight some new ideas you had along the way. Um, and I would encourage that, especially if you think that you have an idea that has multiple applications, but because of the scope of the paper, you really focused on only one, and you did a really great job with that. Um, but then suggest how it can be reapplied to other areas. Now, there are other techniques. Okay, so I don't want to say they're just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What I would do is I would look through the models. I would get onto the databases. I would look at the books and the journal articles you have on your topic. See how do they close. All right, and try to develop templates. And then use whatever one you have data for, or whatever one is convenient for you to use. That's how I would do this. By the way, you can use the same strategy for the hook. Just look through, or basically the start of your work. Just look through your models, look through your sources, and see now what do they do? Do they open with a real life example? Do they open with an historical positioning, like an historical overview? So they're giving sort of information just to get the reader on page with the topic. How do they open? So these are some thoughts for you to look at and think about. We've been discussing this for most of the second half of the semester, but there has been some sickness going around and some other things. So if you've been missing it and you haven't really just sort of thought through the whole structure of the paper, then I hope that this video has helped bring you up to speed.